So I'd like to present Andrea Kuszewski, and please give her a warm welcome.
Hello. Does that sound good? Okay. My name is Andrea Kuszewski, and I'm going to tell you how you can design your life to get smarter every day, starting right now. You can leave here today and actually be a little bit smarter than when you came in. This is my favorite quote, and this is like my life motto right here. One must not pursue goals that are easily achieved. One must develop an instinct for what you can barely achieve through one's greatest efforts. Now, while Einstein was not a neuroscientist, he did know what he was talking about when it came to the human capacity to achieve. Basically, what doesn't kill you makes you smarter. Now, a little bit of background. I'm a research psychologist and a behavior therapist and an artist, a science writer, and a robo-psychologist for an AI startup here in the Valley. So I have my hand in a little bit of everything. So you'll find out that while I don't just practice, I do practice what I preach here. When I'm talking about increasing intelligence, I'm talking about fluid intelligence, which is the power behind your ability to learn new things and apply that knowledge to problem-solve new situations. It's not crystallized intelligence, which is basically how much information you've learned over your lifetime, how much knowledge you've acquired. Like when you take a language test or a math test, that's testing your crystallized intelligence. What I'm talking about is fluid intelligence, which is the power behind your ability to do all that. So that's what I'm talking about. With everything I'm talking about today, consider fluid intelligence. Now, several years ago, I started as a behavior therapist, and I had been working, this was my very first client, and I'd been working with him for about 2 years, and he was on the autism spectrum. So I taught him social skills, play skills, math, verbal, anything you can think of using multimodal teaching methods. And that's basically bringing information with as many modes of input as possible through play, speaking, thinking of creative ways to teach skills, not sitting at a desk memorizing answers, but as many ways as possible. So one day I come over to this kid's house, and greeting me at the door is his mom, and she's got like this big bouquet of flowers and a box of chocolates and a check for like $200, and I'm like, oh my God, I won the Publishers Clearinghouse, what's going on here? It turns out, she said, you know what, he had an IQ test today at school, and he has improved almost 20 points since the last time he was tested. His IQ had been tested around 85, which is borderline mental retardation. And so when she took him in a couple years later to get tested again, he was almost around 110, which is a pretty big deal considering this kid also had an autism spectrum disorder and learning disabilities, and he was able to improve his intelligence that much. So of course, my colleagues and everyone's like, what are you doing? How are you able to get this, this great cognitive growth? And I'm like, well, magic, of course. But it turns out, I started thinking about it, I'm like, wow, he had a lot of improvement. Now, intuitively, I knew that the methods I was using were making him smarter, but I didn't really think about the science behind why that was happening. So I started looking at all my other clients. It turns out that their scores were going up too. So I said, I must really be onto something here. So I started deconstructing my methods of teaching and figuring out what it was that was causing all of this cognitive growth. And I kind of broke it down into 5 principles, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Now, a couple years ago, there is a big study that came out by Susan Yagi, and she showed for the first time in a lab that you can increase your fluid intelligence by training on a task called the dual NBAC. Now, this is a working memory task, and it's wicked hard. I don't know if you've ever tried it. It's really difficult. It's like a brain melter. And by training people for either 1 or 2 weeks on this task, they were able to actually increase their scores on a totally separate test of cognitive ability. And not only that, they were actually able to maintain those gains several months later when they came back to retest. So this is a pretty big deal in the intelligence community because there had been a lot of debate, and there still is, over whether or not you can increase your intelligence or if you're pretty much stuck with what you were born with. Well, I had known since my time as a therapist, I'm like, well, I've seen it, I've lived it, I've taught kids, I've seen their intelligence improve, so I know it's possible. But some naysayers are like, well, it can't happen. So of course, the study came out and it was a big deal, so of course then people wanted to replicate it. So she actually replicated her own study, and the second study didn't turn out the same. So not everyone had gains that transferred to other tests, and not all of those people were able to maintain them. So she started looking closer at the data, and she found that the people that made the most gains and the people that were able to maintain those gains were the ones that were actually enjoying the activity more. So the people that were rating the tests as more fun, because she used games for these working memory tests, and they were children. And the people that made the most gains were the ones that were having the most fun. So that makes me think, wow, what is it about fun that causes so much cognitive growth? And this was brought up earlier today when someone was talking this morning about emotion being really important and motivation. And it's actually a crucial component of learning. If you're not motivated to do a task, you're not going to improve at it. If you think about sitting down and you're doing, and you're click, 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 I mean, is your brain really doing that much? Versus if you're really into something and you're engaged and you're active and you're having a good time, your brain is going a lot faster. You're making a lot more connections. So the results of all of these studies then is showing that hardcore training does work, but you need to be motivated to have the most cognitive growth. So these 5 principles of cognitive enhancement, they're seek novelty, challenge yourself, think creatively, do things the hard way, and network. Now, you may think, okay, what does intelligence have to do with gamification? Well, if you look at those 5 elements, if you have a really good game design, those are all present in your design. So not every game is created equal. So you can say, games will make you smarter, but if you don't have these 5 elements, it's probably not going to work for you. So I'm going to go through each one. Seeking novelty. If you think about the most prominent geniuses, Einstein, Mozart, Richard Feynman, they were all what we call polymaths. So they were not only proficient in one subject, but they were proficient in many subjects. They were constantly seeking something new to learn, something new to do, experiencing new things. And when you're doing that, you're triggering this thing called dopamine, which we've heard of before. It's this happy little neurotransmitter that's active in learning, motivation, pleasure. And if you have, anytime you can prime dopamine, anytime you can get more dopamine, and you combine that with learning, that's when you're going to have maximum cognitive growth. So things like learning a new language. They show that people that know more than one language have actually higher cognitive enhancement than people that don't. Learning how to paint, taking up a new skill, learn about science, read a lot of books, anything, be a knowledge junkie. That's what I do. So if you're constantly seeking new connections, you're keeping that dopamine flowing, you're constantly interested, you're constantly motivated, you're going to have higher cognitive growth. So here's the take-home points. Learning instrument, language, art class. Pretty much I'm a novelty junkie, which is why I have so many different fields that I'm into right now, but I feel like I'm always on my toes. So this is my lifestyle. I live this every day. Challenging yourself. Now, I'm talking about the dual end-back test and how it's a brain training game and how it can make you smarter. But when you look at the bulk of the games that are out there that say, train your brain, Sudoku, or all these other games, they don't really make you smarter. They make you better at that game. And the trick to make that work for you is as soon as you master that game, you need to immediately move on to the next challenging game. If you learn how to do something and then you just keep doing it over and over, your brain gets efficient. You're no longer doing yourself any good. So the whole idea of gamification of as soon as you master a level, you immediately move on. So you're not gonna achieve one level in a game and then you have to wait a week before you move on. You want to move on like right away. And when you do that, you're constantly challenging yourself. You're motivating yourself just by the nature of moving up the next level. So as soon as it starts to get easy, immediately move on to the next level. I would notice that when I taught children, as soon as they started giving me answers too quickly, I knew that they knew it. I knew I needed to bump it up a little. Just keep it just a little bit higher than they think they could reach. Thinking creatively. Now, this is my favorite topic because I do research creativity. And thinking creatively is not the same thing as painting a picture or being an artist. When I'm talking about thinking creatively, I'm talking about creative cognition. So what does it mean to think creatively? Now, I'm sure a lot of you have probably seen this picture. It's been all over the web for like the last couple months. It's an ad for Mercedes, so if you work for Mercedes, I'm really sorry. But so the left side is supposedly logical, and that's the science and order, and then the right side is where all the art happens and all the creativity happens. Well, that's actually not right. That's not the way creativity works. It's wrong. Creative cognition is actually thinking with both sides of your brain. So people that say that I'm a right brainer, I think with the right side of my brain. Well, if you only thought with the right side of your brain, you'd actually be considered schizophrenic because schizophrenics have all the right brain activity and they don't have a whole lot of transfer back and forth. But people that are successfully creative have even more activity going back and forth, right to left. you're constantly switching back and forth between conventional and unconventional thinking. So you have all these wild ideas, and then you trim those down, okay, which ones are valuable, which ones are relevant. And you constantly go back and forth, zooming in, zooming out of material, from convergent to divergent. And when you're doing that, you're actually creating more connections. You're conceptualizing things in new ways. You're engaging your brain. You're engaging your entire brain. So the more you can think creatively, the more brain growth you're going to have. I mean, I've had kids with Asperger's. The single best thing that was working for them in their treatment plan was getting them to think more creatively. That carried over in every single aspect of their development because it opened their mind up to new possibilities, new ways of thinking about things. There's always another answer. You don't get locked into a single answer set because you're not. It doesn't actually take a lot of brain power to memorize a list of answers. But if you have to conceptualize and come up with answers yourself, that's when you're really doing a lot of work. So anytime you can learn the same information in multiple formats. This morning, Tim Vandenberg gave a talk about Monopoly, and I hope a lot of you saw that one because I thought that was just an amazing talk. I love the idea of using Monopoly to teach math because he's doing exactly what I would tell parents to do and teachers to do. Taking the simple math concepts, how can we create that so that there's the most learning going on? You embed it into other games. You think of new ways to teach the same concepts. And when you do that, you're actually creating more connections in your brain. Doing things the hard way. This is a tough one. How many people use GPS? Okay. I am the type of person, I am exactly the type of consumer that GPS was created for, which is exactly why I do not use it, because my sense of direction is absolutely terrible. And I moved to Boston several years ago, and that's like a nightmare city for getting around. The streets are not labeled, you don't know what street you're on, everything's in a circle, it's a nightmare. And my sense of direction is terrible. So I started using GPS. And one day it broke. And I just was like crumbled, my whole life fell apart. And I found out that my spatial skills actually deteriorated after I had been using GPS because I was getting lazy. I wasn't thinking about it anymore. So once I figured out what was going on, I stopped using it and I haven't used it since. It's been years. And actually my spatial skills have gotten improved. So I kick it old school with printing out a map and I try to find my way around. And if you think I'm lying, you can look in my bag. I have a stack of maps for finding my way around San Francisco. So avoiding cognitive shortcuts whenever you can. You don't always have the time to navigate your way through a map, I understand that, but the more often you can do it, the more you're doing your brain a favor. Not over-relying on technology to do all the work for you. Translation software has gotten amazing. Autocorrect, autocomplete, those are kind of like the worst things ever invented as far as cognitive enhancement, because you no longer have to think about how to spell a word. I would love it if someone did a study on spelling skills since the invention of autocorrect and autocomplete, because I would guarantee they've gone down. I know mine have. So what I do is I turn off spell check, I turn off autocomplete, I turn it all off when I'm writing, and I have to pay attention more, but it's doing me a favor. Networking. Now, this is something where if you're doing all these other 4 things, you're probably doing this too, and if not, you need to start immediately. Whether it be in meet space or online, networking with other people, it kind of opens you up to new ideas. You conceptualize things in different ways. And when you get too narrow when you're thinking and you're in your office, I call it the bat cave because I get guilty of that myself when I'm working, and you don't talk to anyone, your thinking gets very narrow. It gets narrow and narrow and narrow. And then you have a conversation with a random person, and they may say one thing where you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. And it wouldn't have occurred to you because you hadn't had that new perspective. So anytime you can collaborate, it's really, really good. That's why I love these online games where you have the multiplayers, because that's kind of built in. It's a social function. Anyone that thinks that social networking is a waste of time, you tell them to come talk to me. I'll tell them otherwise. And actually this concept, it's not a very new concept. Lev Vygotsky is a Russian developmental theorist who died in the early 1900s, and he came up with this idea of scaffolding. And it's basically peer-to-peer teaching. So you have kids in a group that, one person's really skilled at math, one person's really skilled at English, and maybe their math skills are a little lower. So you have people with varying abilities in very different areas, and they're all put in the same environment, and you let them learn from each other. And this person helps out this kid on here, and then you're building upon that, and that's what's called the scaffolding. And they found that kids that are in those environments actually learn better. You learn better by teaching others. So not only do you get that boost of dopamine when you learn something, but when you teach a peer something, you get that boost of dopamine also. So it's like a double hit. So I want to leave you with a couple comments. Learning is difficult. If you want to get smarter, it is hard work, but it should be hard, but it can also be fun. So you learn to fetishize the pain of struggling through learning something new. I actually enjoy it. When Facebook changes the interface or Google changes their interface and you don't know how to get to your email, or the button disappears and everyone starts freaking out, I think, oh cool, this is fun. Now I can figure out how to do this. I actually enjoy that struggle, and you have to kind of learn to like that. You should always be in a constant state of mild discomfort, I call it. And that's actually the sweet spot. That's where you should be. And remember, you can always achieve just a little bit more than you think is possible. So I set the bar for myself very high, for my clients, for everyone, and there's never been a time when I have not, or a client has not been able to actually achieve more than we thought was possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Lots of fodder here. Anybody? Great.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi.
Do you ever hit those points where you're just like, damn it, I just need to go have a microwave meal and sit on my butt because I'm too stressed to be worrying about stressing myself to continue to learn constantly? And what sort of balance when gamifying a system can we try to absorb from this talk, where we're getting people to really push themselves towards that discomfort, but also give them some time to relax now and again so that they don't end up hating us for it?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I struggle with that in my own life, because I'm constantly pushing myself all the time. And I do take breaks though. I have times every day, at least for a certain chunk of the day, I have to just chill out and try to think about nothing. And that's kind of like that incubation time when actually I have more of my creative ideas, when I'm actually just kicking back. And when I was in art school, I used to sit back on the beanbag chair and I would tape a little sign to my chest that says, "Do not disturb, I'm incubating." And just kind of like letting all these ideas just kind of come to fruition. And you do need that balance where you kind of like rest, but that's actually what creative cognition is. It's the going back and forth. Intensity, and then you just like chill out, and then intensity and chill out. So I guess if boredom sets in, that's not good. So if you're relaxed, that's good, but once you start getting bored, you need to then bump it up a little bit.
Great, thanks. Anyone else?
Hi. Thanks. I just wanted to ask you, I mean, all of this stuff really makes sense for the individual and the mind and neuroscience. I'd like to ask you about of your thoughts of this kind of insights applying to groups and how it would, I mean, if it does work the same, or if groups dynamics have different.
Yeah, it absolutely applies to groups, especially things like in your workplace, how can this be incorporated? If you think about, you have a task to do and your boss gives you a task and says, here's what I need you to do, and here's an outline, and here's how you do it. Well, you could follow the outline, but is that really doing anything for your brain? Not really. But what if you say, give me 3 potential solutions, and then from that we'll discuss which one's the best solution. And that's kind of more motivating for you, because you're not just like, okay, here's my task, I do it. Here's my task, I do it. It actually gives you a little bit of freedom and autonomy, which has been proven to make things more motivating. So even just giving a couple of options. Or there's some debate about brainstorming sessions. Does brainstorming work? Some people say no, some people say yes. Brainstorming does work, but it doesn't work when you say, okay, everyone from the room now go to the conference room A and we're going to have a brainstorming session. And everyone needs to give me some answers. That's not going to work. You can't force it. What does work is just having serendipitous contact with people. You start bouncing ideas off each other, then it does work. That's why here in the Valley, the open office is really big now, because you're constantly exposed to people. You randomly run into people and you start chatting about stuff, going to happy hours and things like that. But you can't force it. So it's a delicate balance, and creativity is a very fickle thing. You cannot force it, but there are ways you can nurture it.
I think we have time for one more. Anyone have a question? Ready for a break? Anyone? Did I miss someone? No. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Andrea.